Welcome to the MamasteFit podcast, Birth Story Fridays. On this episode, Georgia is here to share not one, but two of her birth stories. The first one, baby was Breech, and then she attempted a vaginal birth, but still ended in a C-section. And then the second one was a VBAC at home.
Welcome to the MamasteFit podcast. This is Gina, perinatal fitness trainer and birth doula.
And I'm Roxanne, labor and delivery nurse and student midwife.
And this is the MamasteFit podcast, where we empower you on your prenatal fitness, birth, and postpartum return to fitness journey.
Our podcast shares how to move throughout your pregnancy to stay strong and comfortable, because pain is not a requirement of pregnancy. Understand the science of birth and how to approach recovery after birth.
We share our personal experience as mothers navigating this stage in our lives, plus our professional expertise as birth workers and fitness professionals.
Our goal is to help you feel confident as you navigate the perinatal timeframe for an empowering pregnancy, positive birth, and postpartum journey.
We are glad to have you with us on this journey and that you have chosen us to support you.
Welcome to the MamasteFit podcast, Birth Story Fridays. On this episode, we have Georgia here to share her two birth stories. Her first was a Breech baby, and then the second one was a VBAC. Thank you so much for being here, Georgia.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So tell us, we'll start with your first pregnancy. How was that pregnancy, and what did you do to prepare for birth?
So there's literally as I was pregnant, but first of all, just to mention that we did 9 rounds of IVF, all of which failed. And so we ended up as an IUI pregnancy, which is quite an interesting way round to do things. But because of that, we were sort of automatically in a bracket for like a high risk pregnancy in the UK. So the pregnancy was kind of consultant led, and we were given lots of extra scans, and there was constant kind of anxiety, I think, for me about whether the pregnancy would actually last and come to fruition, which thankfully it did. But I think because the actual conception and falling pregnant was so medicalized, I think I really dreamt about this kind of home birth, all natural, no intervention experience for my birth. And so the kind of key, I guess, event that happened for me in that pregnancy is that I then at 34 weeks found out that baby was Breech, and there was barely a chance of me having that dream home birth. And it really swept the rug from under my feet. I felt emotionally just thrown at the very end of my pregnancy, just didn't know what to do, didn't know who to believe in terms of, I was researching all of this possible breech delivery stuff, but at the same time I was hearing the consultants tell me how small a chance I had and how it was potentially dangerous for me and the baby. And so I was just, the last 6 weeks of my pregnancy, I think, was pretty turbulent emotionally.
Yeah.
And so the prep for me was really Breech specific. It was turning the baby, positions that you guys discuss, like the inversions, every day, probably 20 or 30 times a day. Plus just really trying to maximize room in my body in general, because I felt like, because I'd worked out quite hard, through the pregnancy, I'd continued to go to the gym. I was also hearing consultants say, perhaps myths, I don't know, but say that because I had quite tight abs, that could be the reason why my baby was Breech, which again, maybe we'll come on to, but interesting to sort of, still find a way to blame me for doing all of the things right, So it was really confusing. And what I decided in the run up, as I was being offered ECVs and nothing was working to turn the baby, I decided that because I felt like this could potentially only be maybe my first and last pregnancy, I felt like I was just still going to try for a natural breech delivery, and hope that the baby would turn maybe just before labor or even during labor, or if not, that maybe I'd be able to deliver Breech. And so, the preparation for that pregnancy, for that birth, was very Breech specific. But my second pregnancy, so I think the one that we're probably going to focus on today, because I had that experience much, much earlier on, like around week 15, I actually started a lot of Gina's like pelvis preparation workouts and movements and like lots of hip mobility. And I was doing inversions from like 15, maybe even earlier, like 12 weeks or something ridiculously early. But I felt like I was just kind of preparing myself for the same news, like as if I was going to hear that this baby was breech again, and just have to go straight for a C-section.
Yeah.
But I don't know whether I can thank you guys for it or whether it's just happenstance, but the second baby was not breech. So I was able to try for a VBAC, and with the encouragement of my midwives, did it at home. So completely
That's awesome that's an
opposite
option.
experiences. Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. So with your first, with the baby was breech at 34 weeks, you tried everything to turn baby. Baby did not turn.
No,
Did you
no.
still labor?
Yeah. So the baby was breech, I think, the whole way through the pregnancy. And I believe that he was pretty stuck in one position. He had his legs extended. And I think that it was the position of the legs that was kind of stopping him from doing any turning, because even when he came out, his legs were like fully extended and he had hip dysplasia. And there were just a few things that I was like, yeah, he was just stuck.
Yeah.
So we did try a manual turn. We tried I think it's an ECV. Could be saying that wrong. Yeah. We tried that twice. And I remember having like at one point, like two very muscular, let's say quite forceful consultants, like heave-hoing on my stomach, and nothing was getting this baby
Nothing.
to budge. So yeah, it was probably not, in hindsight, it's not something that I would do again. And we could talk about that more, because I know that like a lot of women are offered ECVs and you have no idea really whether it's going to work. And
Yeah.
I think it's often, again, like quite a scary thing. Like you hear that there are risks and you hear that it might hurt your baby. And ultimately, I thought for me it was worth a shot, because I so desperately wanted to avoid this cesarean, as I think most people do. But ultimately, baby didn't move. And so, as I said, I wanted to try and birth a breech baby. And I knew a lot about the risks involved in that. I'd probably over-researched, but I think ultimately I was scared. Like, I think the consultants had done their work to kind of get in my head a little bit, and I had just a little bit of fear going into that labor. And it was my first labor, so I didn't know what things should feel like. So I did about 21 hours of labor and got to 10 centimeters. And ultimately, I was pushing for, on paper, about 4 hours, and nothing was really happening. So again, I can only really hypothesize from like a complete amateur's point of view, but I feel like baby was very stuck in one position, and I don't know why. So yeah, I was glad, however, that I did try and labor naturally.
I mean, you got to 10 centimeters and pushing, and baby maybe just didn't descend. Maybe like the way that they're sitting on top of the pelvis for breech.
Yeah.
Maybe baby wasn't in a good position to be born breech.
It was really interesting. Like the sensation of pushing was never really there in the same way that it was in my second labor. So like the only way I can sort of talk about it is I wanted to push with each contraction because I knew that I was 10 centimeters, but there was like no resistance. And I think because I didn't have a head sitting on my cervix, like perhaps I just didn't have the kind of, resistance against my cervix to push effectively or efficiently. And so I did push for 4 hours, but it didn't feel like I was pushing. And the midwives would keep saying, like, are you getting the sensation to poo? Or do you feel like anything kind of pushing down, like bearing down? And that, just the whole time I was like, not really, actually. I'm not feeling that. I'm just kind of like going through the motions.
Yeah. I mean, breech babies definitely can still put the same pressure, but I wonder if maybe your baby was a little higher. And so
Yeah.
even if you're 10 centimeters dilated, that doesn't mean that everybody's like ready to push at that time. Like baby might need to come down a little bit further, but over 4 hours, baby did not come down any further. So
No.
then after 4 hours, then they moved and recommended to move to a cesarean birth.
I mean, the
case.
consultants were pretty heavy on their recommendations of a C-section very early on in my labor and pre-labor as well. They just wanted to go straight to a C-section, and I get it. But thankfully, they let me try. And I think it was about 17 hours in. So before I even really reached the pushing stage, they were kind of like hanging around outside the door, checking in to see how things were going and whether I was dealing with labor okay. And so we kind of put things off for as long as possible. But there did come a point where I remember feeling like I recognized that my midwife, my private midwife. I won't call her a private midwife. I'll just call her a birth partner because she was a friend, kind of at the labor. She wasn't like officially on duty. So she had all these different suggestions for like different positions I could try and different aids and different tools for like pain relief. And I remember just like there was one point where I was saying to her, is this normal? Like, does it normally take this long? Like, what's going on? What do we do? And there just came a point where everybody in the room was like, I don't know, like we've kind of tried everything that we were going to try. We can keep going. But, and so we sort of came to the end of the suggestions and I was in so much pain. At that point, I was having like back-to-back contractions with no break in between. They had me up on the bed at that point with my legs in stirrups. And I was doing like a lot of guided pushing. I was exhausted. I didn't know what was normal to feel. And then the back pain hit. And it was like, oh, shit. I don't know if I can swear on this. I'm sorry.
You can.
You have to beep that out. But yeah, I was like, oh, shit. This is the last straw. Like, I can't keep going if I get no relief whatsoever in between contractions. And now it's all up in my back and nothing. And like, I still felt like I was a really, really long way away from giving birth. So, I think I made the call. I think I said, look, I need an epidural at the very least, or some sort of spinal, some sort of pain relief. And then I would like to attempt one last push. If it's possible to do an episiotomy, let's do that. I'd rather do that than a C-section. But I remember the consultant just taking one look once I was under and just going, nope, this baby's not coming out vaginally. And that was that. And then it was just prep for a C-section.
Yeah. But you made the decision. So like that must have been somewhat empowering to be able to be like, I know I did everything that I could.
Yeah, absolutely.
To have the birth that I wanted. And then I got to make the choice to choose the cesarean birth, even though like when you went in, that's not what you wanted, but you knew you did everything that you possibly could have done to avoid it. And then we're almost, I would never say okay with it, but like you got to decide like, okay, this is the path that we need to take.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately I kind of felt like, and this could be like a hangover from the struggle with IVF, but I sort of felt like I was in a bit of a battle with the consultants at the end of the pregnancy. And it almost, I think, was some of it was just me being a bit stubborn and just like, I really want to try this, and like, you can't tell me what to do kind of thing. You may be a bit bratty, and maybe I was having a bit of a tantrum, but I really, really, really wanted to try and birth this baby naturally and vaginally. Like, it was really important to me spiritually to give it a go. And I felt like all my autonomy had sort of been ripped away from me during the IVF treatment. And I was like, it's not going to happen again. Like, I am going to do this. I'm strong enough to do this. And so there was a real triumph about actually being able to attempt a breech labor, because I don't know many women that have even not bothered, that's the wrong phrase, but I don't know many women that have tried a breech delivery, because it is scary and it is unknown for a lot of institutions. So yeah, I'm glad that I tried that, and it was beautiful at times. You know, feeling the contractions and knowing that my body could get to like 10 centimeters on its own. There were beautiful moments, and there was a part where I was in the birth pool, and that's something that I'd always imagined. And I just sort of was like, yeah, okay, I'm not giving birth here, but I did get to do the things in the run up. I did get to do my little rituals, I guess.
Yeah.
And then I guess it was also really interesting psychologically to have a C-section and witness some of my pregnant friends or then pregnant friends not have a C-section, and kind of the differences between the two experiences, and just to know what somebody who's had a C-section goes through, I think has now been really valuable to me in support of my other friends, and sort of being able to prep them for what the recovery would feel like. And some of the mental, some of the mental health stuff is a bit different afterwards as well.
Yeah.
Because you're dealing with a kind of a restriction that I think some people who have delivered vaginally don't necessarily have. So there's a different type of like limitation when you've just had the baby. So that was interesting. And I am glad that I pushed for to try it, to attempt it.
Yeah. No, I think that with fertility treatments, IVF, IUI, all of those things, you do, like you said, lose a lot of your autonomy. And it's almost like your body is like, you're really hoping to get pregnant, and then you're trying all of these things. And so like in your mind, you're like, I feel let down. But then you were able to still go into labor to 10 centimeters and start pushing your baby out. So like your body is strong and you are strong and you can do it. But you still had a C-section, but you were able to make and like kind of regain that like autonomy, that's just really the best word. You kind of took the power back for yourself for this experience, and the experience still matters. And I think that that's important.
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
A lot of people don't get to choose to have like, or even attempt a breech vaginal birth. Like you were saying, it's not very common, and finding a provider who will even support it is really hard, even in the US. So I love that your provider still kind of let you do it though.
Yeah, I don't know if it's slightly different in the UK because we're working with the NHS. So they sort of have a one size fits all approach, which is that ultimately we get to decide. I don't think they can turn us down as such. If we say we want to try a VBAC or we want to try a breech delivery, I don't think they can sort of turn us away. I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but in the US there are consultants that just won't do it.
Yeah. So if your OB provider won't do breech vaginal birth, or they don't support VBACs, you have to find a new provider.
Yeah. So
they can choose not to take you on as a patient. So that is interesting. And almost like you have more rights in the UK.
Well, I think we might have more rights, but they definitely did not encourage it, put it that way. It was tense. And so, yeah, I was an anomaly, and we had to have there's so much language around it that's so negative as well. But I had to have an out of guidance plan where the head midwife had to have a very serious conversation with me and get me to sign loads of papers to say that it was my decision to do this. And, even just the kind of, the out of guidance, you feel like you're rebelling against the rules. And I don't know, it's, I think there are a lot of women that would have just been told C-section is the right thing here. And actually just not even questioned whether it was their choice to try a breech delivery, because a lot of it does come down to the nuances of the semantics of the language and what the consultant is saying, how they're saying it. It can feel like it's kind of their decision. But yeah, with the NHS, I just knew that ultimately I could make the choice. So yeah.
That's awesome. So first birth, you did IVF 9 times, IUI, got pregnant.
Yeah.
Had a beautiful pregnancy, 34 weeks, breech baby, did all the things, labored, got to 10 centimeters, pushed for 4 hours, and then had a C-section, and then recovery. How was the recovery? Like your postpartum
Oh,
journey?
it was so brutal. I'm not gonna lie. There are people I know that have had beautiful C-sections and the recovery has been very straightforward. That's not what happened with me. I felt really debilitated. I felt a lot of pain. And I went back into the hospital a few times, like convinced there was an infection. But apparently there wasn't. They did all the tests and it just felt it felt like I'd had abdominal surgery, you know.
Yeah, which you did.
It was painful. And I was prepared to do that again, to have a second child, but my fear going into this second pregnancy was, how on earth am I going to deal with that kind of recovery and have a 21-month-old running around?
Yes. That's a very valid concern.
Just have no idea. Like, I mean, I know a vaginal birth is going to be just as hard, if not harder in many respects, but I've got to give it a go, right? Because I just don't know how women do it. Like, hands down, like the women that have a C-section and have toddlers running around, just praise those women, because I don't know how it's done. It seems so challenging.
Yeah. So let's get into your second pregnancy. So we had a VBAC, but how many months postpartum were you when you got pregnant? And then how was that pregnancy and how was your prep different?
I was 13 months postpartum. So we decided, because of our journey previous, we decided to get trying again as quickly as possible, because we didn't know if it was going to take us another like 3 years or something. But it didn't. It happened quite quickly, thankfully. And so I was pregnant 13 months postpartum. I was still breastfeeding. And then around the 10-week mark of being pregnant, I realized that breastfeeding just wasn't an option for me anymore. It made me feel physically sick. It was painful. Truth be known, my toddler didn't really need it either. He was absolutely fine. Weaning him was I think more challenging for me than it was for him. And then this pregnancy was so smooth and so beautiful, so perfect. Found out at 20 weeks that he was already cephalic and that we were just staying in that position. And I was like, oh my God, I've got a head down baby. This is great news. It's not my body. I don't have to blame myself. It's the baby's in the right position. I can do this. And then at 37 weeks, they told me that the baby had started measuring small. So
Oh,
there were numerous things floated around, but the first thing that the consultant said was, we would like to book you in for a C-section at 38 weeks. And
no.
I was just devastated because it felt like a kind of like, oh, here we go. Of course this is going to happen kind of moment. Like, of course I don't get to have the vaginal birth that I want. I was just defeated and really depressed. And I also didn't really know enough about the information that they were giving me. So I had to go away and again, like, do some research and gather my thoughts and understand what these results were that they were talking about. And ultimately, what they had measured is that my baby's percentile had dropped. So we had dropped from something like 22% to a 9%. And again, I don't know what it is in the US, but in the UK, anything under a 10 is considered small. And
Yeah.
and because there was a real shift in the engagement of the baby. Like, the baby had definitely dropped from one scan to another. And it was also a different, it was a midwife scanning on one scan and a sonographer on the other. There was a few questions about, okay, how accurate is the scan? And they gave me all the specifics about the scan, maybe not showing the right size. And like the 9th centile is so close to the 10th. Like, would we even be having this conversation about C-sections if you were like a tiny, tiny, tiny bit bigger? But also, what was really interesting is that because this was assisted conception again for this second baby, I knew the exact date that I was, for want of a better expression, inseminated. And the
Yeah.
doctors had actually been measuring or dating the baby a week ahead the whole time. So I was like, oh, hang on a minute. There's no way possible that this baby is actually, let's say, 37 weeks. It's actually 36 weeks because I know exactly when
Yeah.
that sperm went in my body and there was nothing in there before. So I was like, so could we just like do the calculations again based on the baby being 36 weeks, just out of interest? Would this baby be measuring small? And of course, no, baby is like fine. So that gave me some kind of like inner confidence that I think this baby's okay. Like I think we're good. And I had like the blood tests for preeclampsia, and I had the urine tests. Everything else was coming back fine. The Doppler study was coming back fine. So there was no other indication that the baby was small or that the trajectory of growth was kind of declining apart from this one scan. So it was, to me, again, like really interesting that I was just automatically kind of put on the pile for a C-section without that being kind of further questioned and investigated. And like, again, like I just felt all these feelings come up of, oh God, here I go again. I'm going to have to fight the system. I'm going to have to fight this suggestion that I should have a C-section. And straight away, the midwives and the consultants were very, very quick to rule out a home birth. And the idea was, well, we can keep measuring and we can keep doing the Doppler studies, but we want you in hospital for the birth regardless. So already I felt like my dream was being taken away. And it sucked, honestly.
Yeah.
But after like 3 or 4 further Dopplers and everything was like fine, like the baby was measuring so perfectly. There was no indication that anything was happening placenta wise, So I was just like, you know what? I feel like I could still try a home birth. What do you guys think? And the consultants were very against it. And then I had one really supportive midwife who was like, look, I'm not going to say anything if you just stay at home and you want to just leave it till the last minute to kind of call the hospital. If that's what you choose to do, then that's what you choose to do.
I love it.
So I was like, okay, let me think about this. And so I like got a lot of advice from some other midwives, and we did like an out of guidance plan, which was essentially to say to the hospital, look, I do intend to have a home birth, but keep me on your books. I might transfer in. I don't want to get into an emergency situation. So it felt a little bit risky. It reminded me of the first pregnancy and the first labor, where I felt like I was kind of going against the rules and I was like the odd one out that wasn't following the guidebook. But I guess that's just how I do birth. Maybe, I don't know. So I also had a doula at the time who we had a conversation about like where I would feel safest to try and labor. And honestly, at this point, I didn't know because I was scared. I was like, I don't know, like maybe I should be in hospital. Everybody's telling me to be in hospital. I just want the baby to be safe. What if I do need a C-section? And she said something about, obviously the cascade of interventions is like, once I'm in hospital, they might start me on some sort of induction if things aren't moving quick enough, for example, which likely with me and the risk of like a uterine rupture after my first C-section is likely going to cascade into the recommendation for another C-section. And she said, look, the first intervention would be leaving your house. And if you don't want any interventions and you don't want any cervical checks and you just want to be left alone, then you can just stay in your house for as long as possible and just know that the second you step outside, you are closer to those medicalizations. So I think when she said that, I realized that there was very little in it in terms of like, we live very close to the hospital. We could actually transfer into the hospital as quick as they could prep me in the hospital for an operation. So I would be prepped in the ambulance as much as possible. And it turned out the transfer time was very similar to just the prep time in the hospital. So there wasn't, aside from the actual logistics of getting from my house to the hospital, there wasn't much in it in terms of if an emergency did happen. It felt like it would still be very similar treatment. So with that information and a few further conversations, I just decided to go for a home birth. And if I transfer in, then so be it. But let me give this a go. And so that's what happened. Spoiler.
Spoiler alert. So tell us, let's start from the beginning of your labor. Like, how many weeks were you, and like, how did labor start? And then give us the whole story.
Well, both of my boys were born on their due date, which is crazy. Yeah,
that's
really
so
weird.
Crazy.
But yeah, so I was kind of getting a bit bummed out because I was getting to like 39 weeks and 6 days, and I was like, oh, everybody tells you that second pregnancies are going to be sooner. What the hell? And so I just thought, even though I hadn't even reached my due date, I was like, oh, this is awful. I'm having to wait so long. And then at 1 a.m., so like an hour after the clock turned midnight, I felt my first contraction on my due date. So this boy was so punctual. It was unbelievable. And I had like a mild contraction, at 1 a.m. And I had realized that in the first labor, I think I kind of got in the zone really early on, like those early contractions where like I should be trying to sleep through them. I should be trying to, just relax, maybe just ignore them, maybe just get some rest. With my first, I was so excited about it. I was like, oh my God, here's a contraction. Let's get the contraction timer out. Let's get going. Let's get my birth ball out. Let's get the candles lit. And I had no idea that like 24 hours later, I'd still be going. But this time I was like, okay, that could have been a contraction. Let's try and go back to sleep. And then, at half an hour later, same thing. And I'm like, okay, now I need to get up and use the bathroom. Like things are happening here. But let's go and tidy the house. And at that point, I realized that my partner was not in the bed. So I had woken up and I was having contractions and I knew I was in labor. And I turned around to kind of tell my partner, and he's not there. And I was like, oh no, where have you gone? And why have you disappeared now? And it transpired that like our toddler had woken up. So he'd gone and fallen asleep in the toddler's room. But it was kind of perfect because I was just left on my own for those deep, dark hours of the night, just kind of laboring away, and nobody knew. And it felt very secretive, and it felt like quite animalistic and primal. And I just went into nesting, like serious nesting mode. And I just tidied our bedroom within an inch of its life and just set every candle out and every little detail. I had a bath, I just enjoyed our bedroom and stayed there. And then it was time to maybe like go get some food. So I had some porridge and some blueberries. And then I was just like, this is really cool. Like nobody knows I'm in labor. Here I am eating my breakfast. It's now like 5 a.m. And the house is like so tidy that I just feel so content. There's nothing stressing me out. And that was, then things were like ramping up. So I was getting contractions about every 10 minutes at this point. Maybe some of them were a bit more spread out, but on average about every 10 minutes. And I was losing my mucus plug as well, like as the course of the night was going on. So I knew what was happening, but it was still really manageable. I was still talking through everything. Well, not talking, but I could talk if I wanted to. And then my toddler woke up and things stalled. Like I feel like my brain just went, no, not in front of the baby. You're not going to be in pain in front of the toddler. This is not happening while he's in the house. So it was so interesting because I'd heard people say things like that would happen. And you're sort of skeptical that your brain is that powerful to just stop labor, but it definitely stalled. There was like 2 hours while he was awake where I'd gone from having contractions every 10 minutes to then having like 2 in the space of the 2 hours. So nothing was happening. And I got a bit concerned that maybe it was false. So we sent my toddler off to the grandparents, and then I went for a walk. And yeah, within like the space of half an hour, they were back full force. It was crazy. But I guess I just knew that it was kind of safe to go into labor now. And I did some really beautiful things. Like I wanted to spend a lot of time outside because I was in the hospital for the last labor. I wanted to go for a walk and spend some time in the garden. And I remember just doing like loops of our garden, and it's like autumn here. So the leaves are red and the sun is low, and just, it was just beautiful. It was so different as an experience. We couldn't get hold of our midwife. So I couldn't tell the hospital really, even if I wanted to, because I wanted to go through our midwife so that she could direct me as to like what the appropriate course of action should be. But she had been called to another birth, so she was unreachable, which in hindsight, I think was a blessing because it delayed the hospital finding out. So it meant that I wasn't kind of on the clock. And by the time we got hold of her, she was like, I'm going to send a different midwife. I'm really sorry. Someone else is on their way. I'm not going to make it. So about 12 hours after the first contraction now, so like 1 p.m., a midwife came over and she assessed me. She did all of the blood pressure and the urine checks, and everything looked fine. Baby's heart rate was good. So I was pretty confident that all of the worries that I had about the baby being small and maybe not dealing well with labor, I don't know, I was given a bit of reassurance at that point that everything's fine. You can keep going at home. And then I just continued contracting. And I was using a lot of tools that I've seen on your guys' Instagram. So much of the stuff I did in labor was down to you two. I just swear I was trying to like remember all of the posts. And I actually had a WhatsApp chat that was just saved between myself and my partner. And before I went into labor, I just sent him like 3 or 4 different posts and videos, and they were all yours. They were like one thing from another person on Google, and then like the rest of it was all yours. I'm so glad we
could support you.
Yeah. No. And so I was like, okay, let's go through some of these things. So we did like Gina's, she's like a partner labor, like early labor flow. We did that, and I was doing like her labor, like early labor flow workouts. But yeah, then it kind of got to a point where it was like, okay, I need to get the birth combs out, and I need the TENS machine on, and I need some serious hip squeezing. And my partner was doing all of that. And at the same time, I remember Gina said on one of her, I don't know if it was this last birth story, I think it was, she'd said something about how the contractions for her, she like tried to gaslight herself out of the contractions. So like you can feel a contraction coming on for like 10 seconds, but that's not the painful part really in context. You know, there's like only really 20 seconds of like intense pain. And so I remembered that, and I fixated on what she'd said. And I said to my partner, Kenham, I was like, I want you to count 20 seconds for me on this next one. I'll tell you when to go, and I want you to count. And I want you to count really loudly, like as if you're like a drill sergeant. And so he's going like 1, 2, 3. And I'm like breathing through it. And I'm like, by the time we get to 10, I'm with him. I'm like, 10. Then we go back down. It's like 10, 9, 8. And I remember like knowing that if I could count to 10, that I was then on the downhill. And I kid you not, we did that from 3 p.m. all the way through to when the baby was born on like every contraction. So he's
Gina will
squeezing my hips. He's squeezing my hips, and I'm going, count, God damn it, count. And he's going 1. And I'm going, not loud enough. And it was really, really helpful for me. There's actually a video of me doing it on our Instagram, and it's it's just madness to like anyone who's not in the contraction. You're just like, what is the counting to 20 about? But it was kind of like really meditative for me. And it was also it just demystified it all. It made it all so much more manageable. Like, I can count to 10. I know I can do this.
Yeah.
And so every contraction I was counting to 10 and then back down again. And that was super helpful. And then it was time to get the birth pool filled up, and we just carried on in that position. I just got in the pool and he was still squeezing my hips and we were still doing the counting, and the midwives were there. They were just observing. There was no cervical checks happening or anything like that. And eventually I just remember feeling for the first time, oh, this is what pushy means. Oh, this is what the pushing sensation that everyone talks about feels like. And just this uncontrollable, I guess, ejection reflex, right? So like just the feeling that this baby is coming. There's nothing I can do to stop it. The head is there, it's moving down, and I have this ball that I can feel I can push with now, and I feel I can push against. And another thing that you guys have talked about is, so the breathing in labor and the using the diaphragm both on the inhale and the exhale, like that sensation of like, oh, hold on a minute. It's not just every time I sort of exhale that I can push with that. It's actually on the inhale, I can use my diaphragm to sink down and bear down as well. And that was something that, again, like from just watching your reels, was just so helpful. I was just doing that on every contraction and every breath. And I guess it just helped me focus on the breath in less of a wishy-washy way. So like, I'm a singer. Let me just phrase that, give you that context first. I'm a singer. So when I think about breathing, I actually think about it really anatomically. And I think about what the diaphragm is doing. And I think of the shape of the lungs and the shape of the belly and where the breath is actually going. So a lot of hypnobirthing sometimes feels a bit wishy-washy to me when they talk about using the breath and they don't really give any context. I want to know like exactly how am I supposed to use this breath, because there are options. So again, that was just so, it's kind of so obvious, but so not at the same time. Like, of course you can use the inhale and the exhale. And I felt like I was kind of 50% more efficient by doing that. So I was speeding everything up, at least in my mind. That's how it felt. I felt great doing that.
Yeah, that's
awesome. And then
awesome.
There was one point later on, like not too much later, where I just thought, hang on a minute, my waters haven't broke. This is different. And the sac started to bulge out.
Oh.
So we thought for a second, the baby might be born in the sac. And for ages, the sac was like bulging out and it was getting big, and it was like this big balloon that was kind of like bulging out. And again, like weirdly, it felt quite nice. Like this is going to sound maybe a bit too much information, but it was kind of like rubbing up against, like back up against me. It was like quite smooth. It was almost like somebody like massaging a little bit. So it was really interesting to have this sensation of like something there that was kind of like smooth and like massaging me at the same time. So I, again, like obviously wasn't expecting that, but at times I was like, oh, that feels quite nice actually. This is nice.
Yeah,
Labor
it was
is
just
nice.
helping like stretch the area.
Yeah. It just felt, I don't know. It just felt good. And so I remember at one point just like saying in the room, I was like, this feels really good. This is good. This is not what labor felt like last time. This is, sure, it's painful, but like I'm leaning into it. And I was leaning into every contraction rather than trying to run away from it. And, you know, the first birth was all about like, no, here comes another contraction. And then this birth was like, come on, we can do this. Let's go, bring it on. So the mindset was totally different. And then eventually it got to the point where I was like, I am feeling what I think is the ring of fire. And I am feeling some intense, what feels like tearing. I would like to know if this is the baby's head coming out. So I don't want a cervical check, but can somebody just have a look and see, like, are we there yet? Are we seeing the baby's head? And I was so scared that they were going to say no because of my last experience. I was like, oh God, please just tell me that you see the head. And thankfully the midwife was like, I see the head. And it was just an amazing feeling to know, okay, this is the point of no return. This is really happening. Like, I feel like now I'm at home, I'm in the pool, everything's happening as it should be. I never got to this stage, even close, with my previous birth. There's no going back now. I'm doing this. And then she said she thinks she'll be able to see the eyebrows. And I had known that like around the eyebrows and the ears was like potentially like the widest part of the head. So my thinking, even though this may not be correct, my thinking was, if I can get those eyebrows out, then everything from there down is going to be a little bit smoother and a little bit slimmer. And sure enough, it was on that push that the head came out. And it was I still to this day just can't believe that I did that. And I think that I respect it so much more for it being a VBAC birth. Not that obviously every birth is incredible, but for me personally, I think even up until that last moment, I was kind of doubting myself. I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this. I really want to. I'm really going to try to, but I wouldn't be surprised if I lose the fight, And so it was just crazy. And I just kept saying to my partner, I was like, I did it. Oh my God, I did it. And he's like, you did it, Georgia, you did it. And then on the next push, his body came out. And that was the birth. The water sac was still kind of like half hanging out of me because it still hadn't like fully exited my body. So I remember when I got out of the birth pool, they were like, here, hang on to this, and like handed me my water sac. And like I had to walk to the bed with that and like my placenta, and it was all pretty gross. And those are the things that I missed first time round with a C-section, but yeah, it was just incredible. And just so triumphant in comparison to my first birth. I just felt like I had I'd kind of achieved the end of this huge goal that I'd had for life, really. And it just, if I never do another thing again in my life, that's fine. I've achieved this. This was massive.
Yeah. I mean, it's an amazing feat, just being giving birth and holding your baby after you did it with your own body. And you did it on your terms too, which I think is also just very empowering. Everyone was telling you just have the repeat C-section and finding all of the reasons to like tell you to not do this at home as well. And you're like, no, that's not what I want to do. I feel comfortable. You told me the risks. I still feel comfortable. Like I think that that's also a thing that's forgotten, is like, you can tell somebody the risks and the benefits of doing all of the different things, but it's ultimately your decision and you get to make that choice. And you got to make that choice and got to surrender to the process. And you ended up with a beautiful home birth on your terms. And I love that.
Yeah, it was incredible. And I don't want to, I don't want to feel like people shouldn't listen to the risks. And obviously it goes without saying that there's a lot of information that I've kind of skipped over that I had that allowed me to come to the decision that home birth was safe. I realized that a lot of women they're not lucky enough to have that decision and, and have that power to kind of choose for themselves. But I also think on the flip side of that there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of women that are undergoing things like C-sections for, reasons that maybe are quite small and, maybe they're unnecessary at times. And it's really difficult as the patient to understand some of the results or some of the information that's being given to you. So I guess it's just about encouraging people to do their own research and like really look into the risks versus just kind of accepting like, oh, consultant said I should have a C-section, so get me booked in kind of thing. Because going back to the recovery, the comparison for me of the two, I was like, oh man, like a vaginal birth is so much nicer recovery wise for me on that particular one than the C-section. Like, I'm so glad that I was able to do that.
That's amazing. That was my next question. So how was postpartum and recovery? So and it's a very common thing that I've heard from people who have had a VBAC is that they're like, my first recovery, in some of them were not as bad. Where like you were in a lot of pain after your C-section. Some of them, they're like, I was like able to move around and it wasn't like uncomfortable, but it definitely was a longer recovery compared to then having a VBAC. And they're like, it was still a huge difference. Like I didn't have this huge incision on my lower belly and like was able to use my abs. Like just like not being able to use your abdominals is really hard for a lot of people. And probably you, for someone who worked out her whole pregnancy, that's a really big like hurdle that you have to kind of overcome during that recovery. So
I mean, the mental health side of that as well, you know, going from the difference between how soon can you get back into the gym after a C-section versus how soon can you kind of get back into the gym after a vaginal birth. You know, there's a huge difference there, and how it feels going back to workouts. I mean, I've, again, like since I've been following your postnatal workouts, and honestly, like feeling at 3 weeks past this vaginal delivery, feeling like, I could do this. Come on, give me some more. Like I want to add some weights to this now, and feeling, and that's great. And you know, I'm not encouraging people to rush into back into the gym, but I do feel in myself like I'm ready to pick up some weights now, and you know, do some proper workouts. And with the C-section, oh god, it was just a totally different story. Like like twisting my body in any way. I felt like I just felt so vulnerable. I felt like I was just going to like tear myself in two all the time. And actually it made the first 12 weeks of having a newborn something else as well. It was really hard to focus on like being sympathetic to anyone else, including like the baby and my partner. I was like, I don't have a lot to give you guys right now because I myself am really in so much pain. I don't know how I'm supposed to like look after other people right now. And so with that taken away this time, I just feel like I can be a lot more caring and not enjoy is the wrong word, because I did really enjoy being a mum first time, but yeah, it's physically I can run around with my toddler and I can, you know, dance around the room with my baby on in the carrier and things like that. I couldn't really move first time round, you know, and that it just sort of takes a lot away from you.
So if there was like one piece of advice that you could give someone, although I feel like you've given like little tidbits throughout the whole episode, but like one piece of advice of someone who was either your past self, like going through your first pregnancy or second pregnancy, or someone who might be like, who found out their baby's breech, or they're trying to go for a VBAC for their second baby, what kind of advice like would you give someone?
Oh God, yeah. So I guess I'd love to have some advice for people that are finding out that their baby is breech, but obviously I wasn't able to turn my baby, so I can't give any advice on like what exercises to do. And I had a complete mental breakdown about it, so I'm definitely not the person to give advice on like how to stay strong through finding out you got a breech baby, because I didn't. But I will say that in retrospectively, I think what everybody tells you is true, that it doesn't matter how your baby is birthed. You are going to have a beautiful experience if you can find the beauty and the positivity in it, and you're going to have so much to think about and so much to love after when you have the baby in your hands and a healthy baby, that the actual birthing experience does become quite insignificant quite quickly. And I didn't believe that at the time when people would say that to me, but it's tremendously true. It's huge. I don't want to undermine birth. It's massive, but to me, it's not as huge as the human being that's created from that experience. So yeah, there's some truth in that. And then I think for VBACs in general, yeah, I think you often hear like people on podcasts and in books about VBACs say that you have to like really want it and really believe in it to make it happen. And my thing would be like, I didn't. Like I felt like I had fears and I felt like I had doubts still in this VBAC labor and birth. And I felt all the way up until, like I say, like the head was out. I did have that feeling of like, oh my God, but what if I can't do it? Because I couldn't do it first time round. And like my confidence was really knocked. And I think there's just like a different mental perspective and approach, which is, I think is just like, I'm going to give it my absolute best shot. And if it happens, it happens. And if it doesn't, then we'll deal with that at the time.
So I do love both of those advice, because I do think that there is a lot of emphasis put on our birth. And I mean, I still think about my births, but it is like, it's important to know like the baby, like birth is a small portion of it. It's still important, but it's a small portion. The actual human that you created with your body and then now get to raise. It's like the best kept secret that Gina and I joke, like parenthood in general is like the best kept secret. Watching these little humans you grew with your body grow up into like functioning adults is so amazing. Our birth, again, it's still important to feel empowered and heard, but it's a small chapter within the long book of their life. And I think that's amazing advice. And then with VBAC, like, I think that we give that advice for like unmedicated birth is like you have to really want it to get it. But I think like you can still have some doubt for VBACs. And I think it's very common to still have some doubt because usually like you did lose some confidence from your first birth. And like you don't have that like, no, like I know I can have this vaginal birth because you don't have that like experience. So you do always have that doubt. And I think that that's a totally valid thing to still have and know that it's okay.
And to know that there's like a workaround. It's okay if you don't feel 100% confident. It doesn't mean you can't have a VBAC. Yeah.
Yeah. Doesn't mean that you're not going to do it though. Like you can still do it. And I love that. 2 little nuggets of advice. I love it. But thank you so much, Georgia, for coming on and share not just 1, but 2 birth stories that are so, so empowering. And I love that you trusted us to support you during your pregnancies and births as well, and in the postpartum.
Thank you. Thank you. Honestly, if only you guys knew how much time I'd spent on your Instagram page.
We love it, though. We love that you wanted us to support you throughout it, but also wanted to come on and share your story as well.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for hosting.
Hi, my name is Lakeisha Murphy Spencer. I am a certified nurse midwife in the Central Carolina area, and I recommend MamasteFit to so many of my patients because it's so important to get that functional fitness base in. They are amazing at explaining the physiology of different changes that happen in pregnancy, before, during, and after birth, and they are a great way to reconnect with your body and push yourself to a new level as a mom or a mom-to-be.
I hope you enjoyed Georgia's birth stories as much as I did. I love that she was empowered throughout both of her birth stories to ask questions and take on the risks and decide which risks were worth it to her and which ones were not worth it. That is a huge part of birth work that is not kind of talked about a lot, not just understanding the risks and benefits, but then deciding what of those risks are worth it to you and which ones are not as important based off of the benefits of any of those risks. Knowing that one person might choose something based off of the same risks and benefits than somebody else, and that is okay. And that is why ultimately it is up to us to decide what happens within our birth. We are the ultimate decision maker. Our provider is there to guide us based off of the research, but we get to make the decision ultimately. And I love that in Georgia's 2 birth stories, she knew the risks and was educated on the risks and the science, and she then decided based off of the risks what was worth it to her to have the birth experience that she wanted and to feel empowered during her birth experiences. If you are pregnant and also looking for education and support throughout your pregnancy, birth, and postpartum that Georgia also utilized during her pregnancies, births, and postpartum, you can check out any of our childbirth education courses or even postpartum education courses. Our childbirth education breaks down the science of labor and birth and really kind of gives you the tools to navigate birth and pregnancy, to have a pain-free pregnancy and an empowered birth. We also have postpartum education courses to kind of help prepare you for what to expect in that postpartum period, because that is often a forgotten portion of birth preparation. We also have fitness programs for both pregnancy and postpartum. Our pregnancy programs are offered in 2 different formats in 2 different lengths. We have an on-demand format, which is a video that you follow along with and just work out with us at the same exact time. And then we have an app-based format. And both of these are synced to your trimester of pregnancy for the on-demand or a week of pregnancy for the app. The app has demo videos and a list of exercises, a traditional list of exercises, and they're in different supersets, and these are designed to help prepare your body for birth and have a pain-free pregnancy. For the app, we have a full-length version that's 45 to 75 minutes, and then we also have a mini version that's 15 to 20 minutes per workout. And the prenatal fitness options can actually be bundled with our childbirth education course to save an additional 15%. Our postpartum fitness programs are designed to help you recover from pregnancy and birth and get back to the sports you normally enjoy. So we have a general fitness that is strength training, and then we also have a running and Olympic weightlifting. And if you are in the military, we have a military return to duty that other people that are in more strenuous jobs, such as firefighters or even police officers, have utilized as well to get back to duty. And that one can also be bundled with our postpartum education course. And you can go to MamasteFit.com to check out any of our offerings. And as a thank you for listening to this entire episode, you can use code STORY10 to get 10% off on top of any of our bundles, which just makes it 25% off. So basically free at that point. And if you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe to our podcast so you can be notified whenever we release new episodes. We release new educational episodes every Wednesday and birth stories every other Friday.